Hit record. All right, so we have with us today Dr. Tamika LaSalle. And I'm sorry, let me.
This is the bio. Do you want me to just start? Or?
All right, so we have Dr. Tamika LaSalle. She is an associate professor of school psychology at the University of Connecticut. She earned her PhD from Georgia State University in 2013. Her research focuses on the intersection of contextual and cultural variables in student perceptions of school climate. She hopes to be able to provide some insight about being a Black professor in a primarily white workspace. It is my pleasure to present to you Dr. Tamika LaSalle. She is a friend and a colleague, and I work with her, and she is amazing. So I'll turn it over to you, Tamika.
That's nice. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I have some slides. I'm going to talk about kind of my experience in academia, but I hope that we can have conversation throughout. So feel free to use the chat and unmute yourself if you have any questions or comments. I want to just start off by, if you can put in the chat or unmute yourself and just let me know what academic setting are you in? Are you in a K-12 setting? Are you at a university? And what your job is or your role is there. I don't see anything coming up, but it looks like Dr. Spite, if that's how you say it, is typing. Oh, okay, I got Spite. Brandy, a resource specialist in K-5 elementary school in South California. Okay, great, thank you. 12 months, 12th grade administrator. Great, thank you. And anybody else can add as we go along. So like I said, I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey that started in K-12 education and now at the higher ed level. But I think that, I think that we'll find our experiences are probably mirror each other's because the dynamics pretty much are the same. So like I said, I'll discuss my journey and then overall experiences as being a Black educator and then lessons learned. A little bit about me. So I grew up as a military brat and I lived for the first 6 years in Germany. And then from there, I kind of hopped around from Alabama to Colorado, Georgia, Texas, and everywhere else. And right now I live between like Connecticut and Rhode Island. People say like, where are you from? I say California, but I'm a military brat because that's where all my extended family is. I got my undergrad and graduate degrees from Georgia State University. And when I finished undergrad, I taught in Atlanta for 3 years. So I taught special education at the middle school level for 2 years in DeKalb County. And then I taught elementary school for 1 year. And for me, when I taught in DeKalb, I was at a school that was primarily Black students and also primarily Black teachers. And so that was my first experience. And even when I was at my second school, it was still pretty diverse. And so I was in Atlanta for 10 years. I'd gone to high school in South Georgia. And after that, I got popped into Pennsylvania. And I won't say too much about it since Mia's from there, but I got popped in Pennsylvania and I was in Erie, Pennsylvania for a year for my pre-doc internship. And then I went to Connecticut, which at that time was a culture shock to say the least. After being in Atlanta for so long, my early part of my life, I was used to being, the only Black person around. And then I got to Georgia and it changed and then it flipped back. So I'll talk a little bit about when I left education, when I left K-12, I always knew I wanted to be a psychologist. And then I found school psychology. And so that's why I pursued school psychology. And when I was figuring out kind of where I wanted to go, part of the difficulty with being in academia is you can't just like say, oh, I want to live here and like find a job. Like there has to be a university, there has to be a program. And so when I was searching for programs, I wanted, a good program, and I wanted to be at a place where I can do my research. And Connecticut came up. I didn't think I would ever be in Connecticut, but Connecticut came up, and it just, at that time, it felt like the right fit. And I go off of like my gut a lot, my gut and prayer. And it just felt like a good fit. So I came straight out of grad school and I started at NEAG. A little bit about NEAG. So when I first started, I was the only Black tenure track woman in our entire College of Ed, until 2 years later, when our dean came in from South Florida, and she was a Black woman. And there are about 80 faculty, I think, in our whole college. And currently I'm one of 3 Black tenured women professors in our college. Last year, we brought on 2 great women. And then an article came out with a lot of the recent press around Black faculty not getting tenure and being able to secure their job. And we found that UConn currently has 8 tenured Black women faculty out of 944 Black women faculty, which is 0.8%. And even nationwide, we only represent 2.1% of Black women, our Black women faculty. So what are some of my challenges? And like I said, we'll have time for discussion, but also use the chat if you have something to add. Part of my challenge was dealing with the burden of representing all Black people. So, the interesting thing when I came to Connecticut was like, New England perceives themselves as very liberal. And so there's a lot of like implicit biases that they don't recognize that they have. And so when I first came, there was a lot of like, I was being nominated for like every committee, and it was just like every time my name ended up like on the committee. And my first year, I went to my department chair and I said, Dr. Is it Spite? Did I say it right? Spite. Okay. No, Spate. Okay. So I see you can relate, but like I went to my department chair and I said, Dale, Mia knows him. I'm like, they're only voting for me because I'm Black. Like this, like I literally was like, I'm on too many committees. And so he sat with me and, we went through and I came off of some committees, and it was just, whenever I think you find whenever you're in a setting where there's not that many Black people, then they want you to be on all committees because representation matters. But a lot of it's because of like the optics of it, that it looks like we're diverse. And when people were coming to campus, then they call on the one Black person to like meet with them. And, it was just constantly being called on to do these things. And every time you did it, it was because of me being one of a few. And then the other way that it showed up for me a lot was around subjective decision-making regarding merit. So for example, for us, we have to produce a certain amount of work every year, 2 articles minimum and teaching evaluations, things like that. This was like my 4th year. I was on the merit committee and we were evaluating people's merit, and merit is like a, money that gets added to your salary every year. And I remember I was sitting there and we evaluated a couple colleagues who our performance was almost identical because we worked a lot together. Same number of articles, we exceeded the expectations, teaching ratings were like the same. And the group that I was in, we would rate each other, we would rate it first, and everything was similar. And then my department chair came in and he gives his ratings, and the ratings were 1 to 3. And so in places where my colleagues got 3s and I got 3s with the other group, I literally got rated like 1 on research, even though I had 4 articles, and all you had to have was 2. Maybe on that one I got rated 2. And then in other places 1. So like for me, that was a big deal. That was one of the first times that I felt like there was this blatant like implicit bias that took place. Before I'll talk about like these microaggressions that kind of happen, but when you bring them to people, they're like, are you sure it's because you look young? Is it because you look young? Are you sure it isn't because of this? They just try to like keep brushing it away. And I wrote a letter to my dean saying that like, when I line everything up, the only difference that I see in terms of the ratings is that I'm Black and they're not. And I would compare it to other Black people in the college, but there are none. So I can't even do that. And, you know, my dean did not handle the situation well. I mean, she was a great dean overall, but she did not handle that situation well. And I had to go to the Office of Diversity. But, you know, the takeaway there is that I happened to be in that meeting and be on the committee and see it happening, you know, and really we should have been recusing ourselves and not seeing that. But, you know, the problem with that is in most of those meetings we're not in, and you don't know how you're being evaluated. And that has implications for your salary. That has implications for promotion. That has implications for a lot of different things. And I, like I said, happened to be privy to the information at that time, but this was my 4th year. What about the last 3 years? How was I getting graded, and how did that affect my merit? And so that was one of those points where it was probably, like I said, my 4th year. That was really one of those points in my career where I felt I struggled a lot because it just felt very explicit. And then the problem is when there's nobody else in the setting, like there's nobody to talk to about it. There's nobody to explain it to, because like I said, it always feels like they're questioning, are you sure it isn't because of this? Are you sure it isn't because of this? And so it just felt kind of isolating to go through that experience. And so those are probably two of the biggest things that happened relatively early on in terms of the overrepresentation and the subjective decision making. We also had, like, you know, a lot of the students in school psych or in counseling psych or not counseling, like school counseling and special ed, you know, if they were coming, they would want to talk to me and for me to mentor them. And I think that, like, that I enjoyed, even though it could feel overwhelming. Our programs are relatively small. Mia was there, and she did that a lot with teacher ed, which was a lot more students. So, you know, the difficult part is you don't want to say no to them because you know that they don't have anybody else, but it's just trying to balance that out in terms of you being able to still do the things that you need to do. And so that's kind of where I struggle, but I've never said no. Sometimes it's just a matter of, like, how much can I provide, or even sometimes linking them with other minoritized students. And that's the other piece where things came up, is evaluating students within my program with my program faculty. So there was me and at the time 3 white women and 1 white male. And, you know, when it came to admissions and stuff, you could see the subtleties in how students were selected for, like, interviews based on where they went to school, based on how many, like, extra activities they were able to do, based on their GRE scores, which was a really big thing. And when you looked at the 2 rows, you could see that disadvantaged a lot of the Black and brown students. And that was one of those things that I had to decide early on, you know, is that something that, like, I'm going to fall on the hill over? Like, is that something I'm going to bring up? And I did, and said, like, it's problematic the way that we're evaluating students. Like, if we're thinking about school psychologists who are going out into the school, we want people who are diverse and have a range of experiences, but we're not doing that. And, you know, people can say, oh, we have this criteria, but, like, you have to be able to have some subjectivity. Like, we're in education, we want to be able to support different students. And then what happened over the next few years is that even the students came to me and they were like, Dr. LaSalle, didn't you notice all the brown and Black students are your students? Which is still problematic, right? Like, the students who were coming in were because we kind of can select our own students. Nobody's gonna tell us no. Like, I was bringing in the students. And so it's still problematic because my faculty really struggled to, like, look past their own bias and would kind of rely on, oh, I'm just looking at GRE scores. I'm looking at these objective measures as their defense, I guess. And so those were some of the challenges. You know, personally, some of the things that I struggled with was, you know, things related to imposter syndrome. I remember my first day on campus at UConn, I went into my office and I was sitting at my desk, and this was you know, before the semester started, I was thinking, how am I going to occupy my time? Like, not knowing if I knew then what I knew now, you know, there's plenty to occupy, but I was thinking I could write a couple of articles, I could do this, like, how am I going to occupy my time? And I just remember thinking, like, do I belong here? Like, do I belong here? Will I fit in? And I put here, like, do I want to fit in? Like, it just already felt so isolating, kind of like walking through campus and just seeing the different faces. And like I said, I mean, for a lot of my life, I was used to being the only Black girl when I was younger, but then I was in Atlanta for so long that like my view of the world shifted. So it felt like I was going back in time. And I really struggle with, yeah, did they hire me because I'm Black? Because the other thing is, we have like APA standards, or, every place has like education standards. And one of our standards says we want to recruit and retain Black faculty. So now I'm in these meetings where they're kind of having these subtle conversations about how do we invite people to meetings or invite students to interviews so that it shows that we're inviting them, or that that they could be admitted to our school. But did we really intend to do that? Most of them no, but it was like a numbers thing, you know what I mean? And so that I really struggle with, did they hire me because I'm Black? And one of my mentors early on, he's a Japanese male, he told me, let your work speak for yourself. Let your work speak for itself. Let your work speak for itself. And so that's what I relied on a lot, is like just doing the work and focusing on the work and letting that guide me. And in faculty, if you're pre-tenure, supposedly you can kind of get fired at any time. You have this 6-year period where you build up, and then they send out your information, decide if you're good enough, and then you get tenure. And a lot of people feel like they can't speak up in the beginning because, your career could be on the line, or something could be wrong. Somebody could like vote against you, and it can be problematic. And another thing I decided early on was that if there was something wrong or something that I didn't feel good about, then I spoke up about it, even before tenure, because I relied on the like, let your work speak for yourself, and thought like, even if like we had clear criteria for tenure. So I thought, okay, if they deny me, then I'll have a recourse, and I will just go through the process. But, I spoke up when I felt like things weren't right, because in our department, nobody else was speaking up. Everybody just like looks around. And the thing that happens that really gets to me is like when I speak up, and then like everybody, like this happened last year, our provost was talking about microaggressions. And he used the example of like graduate students. And so I corrected him, and I just said, hi provost, but like microaggressions is specifically towards like minoritized, like racially, ethnically minoritized groups, and kind of the subtleties that people say. Like graduate students they're not like a marginalized group. So that microaggression is not this general term. And everybody in the chat is like sending me these private chats. I'm so glad that you said that. I'm so glad that you clarified that. And the thing that I'm thinking about is like, all these private chats don't mean that much. Nobody was willing to say anything. They didn't even put it in the chat that everybody can see, like, oh, I agree. So nobody wants to speak up, but then they send you these. I was thinking the same thing, and that kind of stuff, like, just really bothered me. These are some of the microaggressions I experienced at UConn. Can I touch your hair? Yes, that still happened. One time I got called aggressive by one of the most aggressive people that I know, and that triggered me, because when people say angry Black woman or you're being aggressive, it is a trigger, and that really triggered me. And again, because it was from this white woman who like is probably the most aggressive person ever. And then the other thing, oh, are you a student? And then people say, if I explain it to people, they'll say, do you think it's because you look young? I'm like, no, I don't think that that's what it's because of, like they just don't think I belong here. And then moving to New England, the thing that I always heard was this, like, oh, what do you do for a living? Because everybody up here wants to know what you do for a living. Like they care so much about like what you do in social economics and stuff like that. What do you do for a living? I'm a professor at UConn. But oh, you have a PhD? Like, yeah, you have to be a professor. And then they always say, oh, good for you. And so like the first time I heard it, I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't think too much about it. But over the 8 years I've been here, I've heard it probably a dozen times, that exact same play out. Oh, you work at UConn, you have a PhD? Oh, good for you. And it's always by white people, which is to me totally a microaggression. Like, oh, you made it out, good for you, good for you. And that just really bothers me. And then the other one was like, is it fair to only have groups for Black and brown faculty? Like we have the like African American Faculty and Staff Association. And a white colleague says, is that not discriminating? Because why can't white people attend those meetings? And I just said, because you guys have every other meeting to, like you belong to every other group. And it's like, you know, people try to like turn the tables essentially, you know, and it really is frustrating because anytime you want to have something for like brown faculty or black faculty, then people say, well, why aren't we included? And it's like, it's a different experience. It's a different journey, you know, and like, no, you can't, no, you cannot, you're not invited to the barbecue. Like, that's just it. And, but being able to say that, especially in a setting where there were only so few of us. Mia and Dominique came my second year or maybe my third year, I think. And like, I was so excited to see them, right? So like we would get together and like, I was able to like rely on them a lot for support. And people don't understand what that feels like when you're the only one in a building, or only 2 or 3 in a building. And when we all get together, they're calling me, Mia, and Dominique, you know, like calling us all each other's names because they can't, you know, all Black people look alike kind of thing. And it's just, you know, the thing is, you think about like the cumulative effect of this over time, you know, and when I was even doing this presentation, putting things together, it's like you try to block things out so you forget about some of the things that have happened. And then you think about, you know, literally over time, how they've had an impact. And so for me, when I think about thriving versus surviving, because there was a point in my 3rd, 4th year where I tried to run, like I was willing to apply anywhere to escape, to get away. And it wasn't the right decision. At the time, it felt like I just needed to like escape. My partner's he's from the South. And, you know, I just thought I just needed to run away and get away from these people. And I applied to jobs that I didn't even like. And I ended up not, one job I didn't want and one job I didn't get. And at that time, it really hurt. And then I realized it wasn't for me and it wasn't the time. And so it didn't work out for a reason. But I try to like talk to my students and stuff about like, sometimes you have that, like, you want to just flee and you got to sit with it a little bit and see like, is that the right time? So I find positive reinforcers. For me, the best part of my work is the work that I do with like my students in the schools. And so I default to my grad students a lot. Like, that's my team. That's who I write with. That's who I work with the most. And so for me, that's the biggest reinforcer that I have when I go into NEAG. It's like the students. You know, the faculty, it's like hi, but like it's really the students. Also separating work and personal life. So let's say I have 4 people in my program. One I became pretty close with, and the other 2 they're all frenemies. You know, they have this frenemy relationship. And just recently, over the last several months, even the one that I was close to, I had to cut ties and tell her, like, we need to just keep it professional, because she was this white woman who did like performative allyship and acted like she was there to like support and this and that. But anytime a situation came up, she was nowhere to be found and didn't have, it just wanted to be like hands off. And I just said, you know, we just need to keep it like professional, because I don't need to go through that. Like, I have a good family, have a good relationship. Like, there are other reinforcers for me outside of this. So I really had to establish boundaries and build committee where I could, which are some other Black faculty across the country who are in school site. So I don't have a lot of community at UConn. In fact, I have very little community at UConn. And a lot of it really is from people who are outside of that. And you know, I wish that weren't the case, but at this point in my career, I'm okay with it. The other piece is, so being a Black educator in New England, part of the reason that I have stayed this, you know, for as long as I have, is because there's not that many people that look like us who are in the schools. You know, sometimes I go into the schools and you see the brown and Black students looking at you like so like impressed, or they ask like, what's your job? And you can say like, I'm a professor, or what do you want to do? And like, just seeing those faces. When I was in Atlanta, my school was primarily Black, like, you know, I knew what the purpose was. Like, I knew that we could be an example for them, but they saw other Black people being successful. Here, it doesn't happen as much. They assume that I'm the paraprofessional or somebody's bus driver or something like that. And there's nothing wrong with those jobs, but that is the assumption that they make, that's the problem, you know? And so when I go into the schools and I do consulting here with around culture responsiveness, it's some of the hardest work, but I know I wrote somewhere here where I say, like, if not me, then who? That internal dialogue all the time. If not me, then who? And so I know that I have a purpose here for now, and that is to be able to be an example to some of the students that they wouldn't otherwise see in other, if they were in different settings. Because we have a lot of schools that are majority minoritized, like Black and brown students, but the teachers are 90% white and the school is 70% Black and brown students, and so there's a big mismatch. And so that's why I stay, because representation does matter. And one thing I always say to my students, and I say to myself, is to whom much is given, much will be required. And so I tell myself that all the time. I tell my graduate students that. In fact, when she graduated, they gave me a plaque about that. And I just say that, I don't take for granted the education I've been able to get. I don't take for granted the career. I don't take that for granted, because I know people have it a lot worse. So I try to think about, how do I use this experience in a positive way? And over the years, I've tried to learn how to drown out the noise, though it's not easy, but I tried to learn how to drown out the noise in terms of what kind of things I let affect me. And I had to learn how to control that, because otherwise, I realized I'm the one that's always walking around angry. When all this stuff happened in the last 18 months, I got the one, text from everybody that's like, I'm thinking about you and the Black community. I'm always here. I never hear from them before. I never heard from them afterwards. And I'm walking around being upset. I'm walking around with all these feelings, and they don't care, it doesn't affect them. And so I had to learn how to let that go and think about, what is my biggest purpose. The last things I'll say in terms of recommendations, find a mentor and try to find community. And sometimes it's not within your building. Like I said, create boundaries, identify your why. So focus on your work, your students, challenge the status quo, but know your audience and understand your agency. So, I don't walk into a room flipping tables and all this stuff. You have to know, when you're first starting out, I'm not saying put your job at risk, you got to just kind of know your audience and know when the time is right. And I had to learn that along the way, because, I'm going to speak up no matter what, but I had to think about the bigger picture and what my impact could be if I could be more strategic about it. And so to me, that's been one of my biggest challenges. And then the last thing is know when to move on. Like I said, so far it's been my time here. This won't always be the case. And so I think listening to my inner voice and knowing when to move on is really important, because I have to preserve my joy. I have to preserve who I am. And I can't, if I'm at a place where that's being taken away from me, it affects other parts of my life. You can ask my partner, my family, it affects all these other things. And I don't want that to be the case. And so I'm going to stop sharing for a second, and hopefully you guys have some questions. I had you do the chat. So, I'm sorry, the survey. And so let's just look at that really quickly. So what % of your organization includes racial, ethnic, minoritized educators? Okay, so all of you are in places where less than 25% of the educators are Black or brown. Wow. Well, I guess you can relate, right? And then what are some of the challenges that you face? And these were some of the ones: misrepresentation of faculty versus student population, constantly being the spokesperson for all Black people and having to make sure we represent, not being valued as a resource teacher by predominantly all white staff, many microaggressions, not following the IEP, their general ed teachers, not believing what I say about the data. There was one that I missed. Let's see. Doing the work, but others getting the credit. Yeah. And then misrepresentation of faculty. We talked about that one. And then one of the questions, when you're constantly used for your knowledge and expertise, but never granted opportunities afforded to your less educating, less knowledgeable white colleagues, how do you set boundaries that you will not continue to do this, to use me without being accused of insubordination? And so I'll answer that, and then hopefully some other people can jump in, but that's what I struggle with, is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And over the years, and then when things happened the last 8 months, I felt as a Black woman, like I had my own things to say to my students. So, my group wants to put out these standard statements, but I wrote a letter to our students from my perspective about how it's affecting me and what I want to do, because I had my own experience. I had my own voice outside of that mostly all white group. When it comes to, like you said, basically people kind of like using us and not getting the credit and, but not being insubordinate. Like I said, what I had to do was kind of create this hierarchy of like, what kind of things are positively reinforcing in terms of like my job? What are the things I have to do? And then what are the things that I choose to do and that are positively reinforcing? And I have this talk all the time, like say no, say no, say no. I had to just start saying no to things, but making sure that I'm doing the things that I need to do. But sometimes like I found myself, always going above and beyond and over exhausting myself, and nobody else is tired, like nobody else is like stressed about it, and so I had to just learn again, like these are things I know I have to do, but those other things, you got to find the ones that are most reinforcing. And, I think for all of us, learning to say no is really the hard part. Does anybody want to add anything to that? In the chat or...
Yes, I actually want to add to that. I agree with you. I have that problem too. And I also had to learn to say no, but I think a very important part of not being overworked was making sure that I know what's in my contract. What things am I required to do? How many committees am I required to be on? And like you said, if I'm able to choose those things, what things fall best in line with my mission statement or my goal or my reason for being an educator? And those are the things that I choose. I had a situation where we have a National Junior Honor Society. And because I always, I asked in advance about being on the committee for the purpose of community service. Mm-hmm. And they originally said no. Now I'm not going to get into who they choose to be in the National Junior Honor Society. That's a
whole other issue.
Right? But that was one of the reasons I wanted to be on this committee. But they originally said no. I do community service anyway. So once they saw how much service I was doing, then they decided that they wanted to come and ask me. And what I found out was that the reason why was because they didn't want to give up their free time. They only wanted to do service during the school day. So when it came out that I guess they weren't able to do that anymore, now they want me to actually fill in these gaps. And so I had to think really hard about whether I was going to say yes or no, because it did fall in line with what I wanted, but I also knew that I was being used. Mm-hmm. So, in a situation like that, just to give a solution, I decided to do it, not because of them, but because I knew that I could better serve my students. Mm-hmm. And then I could also, again, have that seat at the table with a voice that counts when it comes to deciding or choosing which students are being admitted into the National Junior Honor Society. So in that case, it was the overall goal, but I totally understand everything that you're saying.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think the part that you said at the end is what I always go back to. Like, if I'm doing something, who is it benefiting? Like, is it just benefiting like my colleague, or is it benefiting the students? And when it's the students, I will overextend myself. And, our students, they give it all that they have, especially when they know that we give it all. And so I will overextend myself, but I have to figure, I do ask my question, like, who is this going to benefit, them or you? And like, you're less of my priority. And so that's a really good point. That's a really good point. Anybody else have questions or comments? No. Well, I'll give you a minute to think about that. Mrs. Muhammad, I don't want to mispronounce your first name, said in the chat, if you're looking for a sisterhood of Black educators across the country, consider joining the National Sorority of Phi Delta Kappa Incorporated. That was established by 8 young Black women in 1923. And so she put the link in there. And so hopefully everyone can see that and look into that as a resource for building community, especially since all of you who are here in places where less than 25% of the faculty and teachers are Black or brown. So, I think we can all relate to like what that feels like. And, you know, what I'll say kind of overall is, again, I had to be mindful of the like accumulative effect of being in that environment and the stuff that I was like dealing with over time, physically and mentally and professionally. And so, you know, I encourage you to do the same. And it's easier, you know, we all talk about, oh, like find balance and, you know, do all these things. It's easier said than done. But you know, I've tried to be more intentional about it because it was wearing me down physically and mentally and professionally. It was really wearing me down. And I thought, I've only been in academia for 8 years. I still have a whole career to go. I can't, you know, I can't be so worn down now because I can't imagine what this will look like in 20 years. And so I had to kind of I've been trying to recalibrate. And for different, you know, that means different things to different people, but, you know, I encourage you to do that. And again, try to find community. Mine's not necessarily at UConn, but try to find community so that you can have people to talk about these experiences with. Last thing I'll do, I'll put my email in the chat in case you ever want to connect or have any questions or in Connecticut or Rhode Island. And, oh, cumulative trauma. Oh, maybe you can send that to me to my Gmail, send me some information. That would be great. But that's my email if you ever want to reach out and connect or, you know, do a brown or do a Black women happy hour or anything you want to do, just, you know, feel free to reach out. But thank you all for joining, and I wish you nothing but the best in your careers.
Awesome. Thank you, Tamika. Definitely a lot of gems. I think, like you said, we all can relate to kind of a lot of the things that you talked about. And it's really about protecting your peace, right? Mm-hmm. You know, in this day and age, you know, with all that we have going on, I think we are starting to realize that and understand that as Black educators, Black and brown educators, that we have to protect our peace in order to be able to show up for the students that we work for. I think you pointed out your students is the most important thing to you. So definitely appreciated all the gems that you dropped in this session. If you want to connect with Dr. LaSalle, she put her email in there. And we also, I believe, have that information in the booklet too, as far as your like social media handle, if you want to follow Dr. LaSalle and connect with her for all the amazing work that she is doing in her field. So as always, thank you so much. That will end this session. I will stop recording. I can stick around for a little bit if anybody wants to talk to Dr. LaSalle. And thank you all for joining us for this session. Appreciate it.